Behold, the plasma cutter, the most recognizable weapon in Dead Space, which is funny since it's supposed to be a power tool, not a weapon. Whether you're cutting up slabs of rock or your former co-worker, the plasma cutter ensures that you'll do it accurately and efficiently. So let's see how this iconic weapon has changed throughout the original trilogy, both in gameplay and appearance. To maintain some semblance of consistency, I'll be playing the games on their hardest, non-hardcore difficulties. That is, Impossible for the first and third game, and Zealot for the second game. The plasma cutter is obtained in the first chapter, and it is also the first weapon you obtain. After escaping the initial slasher attack, Isaac finds a dead miner and his tool, in addition to the infamous "carve off their limbs" message scribbled on the wall with flesh crayons. The plasma cutter is also the only weapon in the game that does not need to be bought, making it completely free. The ammunition utilized by the tool is plasma energy. 25 shots can be held in a single inventory slot, and it costs 1200 credits to buy 6 rounds. Similarly to the weapon itself, the ammo does not need a schematic to be bought. Isaac can buy it as soon as he reaches the first store. The plasma cutter starts out with 10 shots in the clip, but can be upgraded to hold 20. It is a single shot weapon that fires a line of ionized gas at the designated spot. With the maximum amount of damage upgrades, the cutter gains a much deeper firing sound, along with what appears to be a small amount of electrical discharge emanating from the weapon when firing. The shots also seem to have a limited ability to either penetrate targets or not completely dissipate when glancing something, since it is possible to hit several limbs at once on a single necromorph as long as they are aligned properly. The maximum rate of fire for the unupgraded cutter is roughly 2 rounds per second, while both speed upgrades increase that to around 3. The alternate fire for the tool allows the weapon's reticle to be turned 90 degrees, making it easier to sever appendages that would otherwise be positioned awkwardly. It is also the only alternate fire mode in DS1 that does not deal direct damage to the enemy. It takes at least 17 power nodes to fully upgrade the plasma cutter. Appearance-wise, it somewhat resembles a bulky pistol that is held and fired with one hand. On the top is a brown lid that houses the plasma energy, while the muzzle of the tool has 2 similarly colored blades that affect the alignment of the shot. As the weapon is aimed, the blades retract, and the 3 lines that assist in aiming appear from the front. The plasma cutter also seems to have a more traditional sight or a scope that is not utilized in gameplay. The reloading animation is odd. Isaac seems to press something near the front of the tool, which causes the lid at the top to slide back, before Isaac pushes it back into its original position. While the reloading animations in the first game aren't as detailed as the sequels, it can be assumed that Isaac is pulling the lid back to replace the cartridge. If the firing mode is set to horizontal, the weapon will temporarily revert back to the vertical mode, which is an oddity unique to the first game. The plasma cutter is easily the most versatile weapon in the game. Its dual firing modes allow it to deal with practically any situation as the need arises. There is an achievement for completing the entire game using only the plasma cutter, and it isn't even all that difficult. The weapon really is that good. If there is a weakness to this weapon, it is the lack of area of effect damage. The plasma cutter isn't terribly suited for tackling multiple enemies at once. It is not effective against swarmers, though you can hit many of them with a single shot, and dividers still need each individual piece to be killed separately. These minor shortcomings, though, can be remedied with other weapons and stasis. Use it right, and the plasma cutter will get you through the entire game without issues.
Are you a doctor?
Calm down. I'll cut you out of there. Is that a tissue laser? A plasma cutter?
The plasma cutter in Dead Space 2 continues being the first weapon Isaac acquires, and is once again completely free. It is procured in Chapter 1, after escaping from Tideman's sex dungeon and finding your way to an operating room while the surgeons are on a smoke break. Isaac takes the surgical tissue laser and turns it into a plasma cutter, while the patient passes away peacefully. And this is where we arrive to the most obvious difference between the cutters in both games, their appearance. While the previous incarnation was an obvious mining tool, Dead Space 2's variant is a surgical tissue laser that now seems to be attached to the flashlight Isaac got from Foster Edgars. The weapon itself is much smaller, now truly resembling a pistol rather than a power tool. The reload animation is much more detailed, with Isaac now visibly pulling the lid at the back of the weapon while a smoking hot cartridge is ejected. Curiously, a new cartridge appears from inside the weapon as the old one is ejected, which seems to indicate that the cutter is capable of holding multiple cartridges at one time. Despite its makeshift nature, the plasma cutter is no less effective than it was in the original game. In fact, it might even be more powerful. While an unupgraded cutter in DS1 needed 2 shots to sever the arm of a regular slasher, the DS2's variant only needs 1. This is a general theme with Dead Space 2. Enemies have less health, but are much faster and more reactive, making for an overall faster paced experience. The upgrade menu is the same, with one exception. There is now a special node. This gives the plasma cutter a fire damage over time effect, though truthfully, I have not really noticed it making a difference in terms of how many shots I need to put something down. It does, however, have a convenience factor to it. Since enemies now only drop items when they are damaged after their death, the fire effect ensures just that, when the killing shot hits their central mass. This is especially useful against the pack, who appear in such large numbers that the initial corpses would despawn before you could stomp them into mass children for their loot. Due to the new upgrade, the plasma cutter now requires at least 18 power nodes to fully upgrade. The sound and visual changes when upgrading the damage are mostly the same. It is also worth mentioning that there is a refurbished variant that is available to the player if they have a save file from Dead Space 1. It more closely resembles the power tool it used to be, but is now smaller. The two variants behave identically, even sharing the same upgrades when you've only upgraded one, but not the other. The plasma cutter continues being a reliable weapon that will take you all the way to the end if you let it. The tradition is continued in Dead Space 3. With the exception of the prologue, the plasma cutter is once again the first weapon you start with. Most returning weapons look quite different to how they used to be, even if they have similar firing modes. The plasma cutter, though, is an exception. It looks and behaves almost identically to the refurbished cutter from DS2. Dead Space 3 introduces the ability to craft weapons, and the plasma cutter can be made by combining a plasma core and a compact frame. Keep in mind that if you want to be able to rotate the shot pattern, you will need to install a separate rotator cuff module. It is also interesting to note that without the module, the shot will be locked in the horizontal pattern rather than the vertical one that seems to be the default mode when the weapon is not actively in use. The cutter no longer uses the plasma energy ammo, but instead the vaguely named universal ammo that all weapons now use. In order to replicate the fire damage effect from DS2, you can apply a flame glaze mod to the cutter. Due to the game's upgrade system, you can now have a mag size higher than 20 and a rate of fire far exceeding the previous cap. Enemy health and behavior were once again changed in the third installment. They seem to have a similar amount of health to the Necros in the first game, and now have the very annoying ability to avoid being stun locked. In DS3, shooting an enemy is no longer guaranteed to stagger them. If you want to ensure that, you will need to deal enough damage in a short amount of time, which the starting plasma cutter cannot do. This reduces the weapon's overall effectiveness, and an unupgraded plasma cutter is therefore the weakest incarnation in the trilogy. More interesting than the standard variant, though, are the two new variants Dead Space 3 introduced, the Plasma Repeater and the Plasma Disperser. The Plasma Repeater can be created by adding a compact directed ejection field to a standard plasma cutter. Compared to the base variant, The repeater is fully automatic and sports a higher default magazine size of 15, along with an increased rate of fire. As a trade-off, its per shot damage is lower, and the shot itself isn't as wide. In fact, if you play with the classic aiming mode, it does not even feature the 3-dot aiming hologram like the other variants do, but it's still a rectangular shot. The plasma repeater fills an interesting niche between the plasma cutter and the game's submachine gun. The plasma disperser can be created by putting a compact conic dispersal to a plasma cutter. While the repeater was the fast low damage variant, the disperser is the slow and powerful one. Starting out with a max size of 8, this weapon rates fire rate for a wide and powerful shot that can easily hit and sever multiple limbs in a single hit. There is also the Planet Cracker Plasma Cutter that is available to the player when they have a save file from Dead Space 1. It is a more powerful variant of the standard cutter that is supposed to have less ammo but does not due to a glitch. If you have access to this one, there is really no reason to use the standard variant. Despite the way they perform, the variants look identical, with only their color scheme being different. It takes some work to make the standard plasma cutter good in DS3, but it is otherwise identical in use to the previous games. The new variants are also a welcome addition to the tools family. No matter the game, the plasma cutter is the most reliable and versatile tool in Isaac's arsenal. It is one of the few weapons that hasn't had its main or secondary fire tampered with. Any perceived differences mainly come in the form of enemy behavior instead. Perhaps it is a sign that the weapon was already perfect.